Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. President of the People's Republic of China Xi Jinping promised Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov support and deepening of cooperation. During a meeting that took place in China as part of the arrival of the Russian Foreign Minister at a meeting of the heads of foreign ministries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization member countries. The meeting between the President of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Foreign Minister took place shortly after the President of the United States Donald Trump announced his disappointment with Vladimir Putin and the 50-day ultimatums, which now concerns not only the Russian Federation but also China itself. We are talking about the possible introduction of 100% duties for countries that buy Russian oil. As is well known, it is the purchase of Russian oil by countries such as China, India, or Brazil that is an important factor in the survival of the Russian economy in the conditions of ongoing Western sanctions. If it were not for Chinese support, perhaps Russian President Vladimir Putin would have had to abandon the model of a war of attrition of neighboring Ukraine long ago, and at least think about a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front. However, the optimistic tone of Sergei Lavrov, who sarcastically spoke about Donald Trump's ultimatums, reminding listeners of his press conference about 24 hours or 100 days and noting that Russia has already gone through a whole series of sanctions. It shows that Moscow continues to reasonably count on Chinese support even after the President of the United States linked Russian and Chinese interests in his desire to put an end to military operations on the Russian-Ukrainian front. As you know, recently the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China and one of Xi Jinping's closest associates, Wang Yi, during a meeting with representatives of the European Commission, noted that China would not let Russia be defeated in the war with Ukraine. Obviously, for Xi Jinping and his associates, Russia's success in the war with Ukraine is also Moscow's success in its confrontation with the West. China may believe that the collapse of the West's hopes of deterring Russia will help strengthen China's own geopolitical influence into a proxy force which is degenerating the Russian state. And indeed, when else have we seen the President of Russia telling Chinese journalists about how his closest relatives are learning Chinese on their own initiative? When else could we actually state the end of Russia as a European project and the transformation of the Russian Federation into a state relying primarily on relations with the states of the Global South? When was the economic influence of China on the Russian economy decisive for the survival of this economy in the confrontation between Russia and the West? Of course, this is a completely new, I would say, historically new situation. The Soviet Union, which fought with Western democracies in the Cold War for many decades, did not depend on Chinese support, but for some time supported China itself. Yes, and the Chinese Communists, led by Mao Zedong, won the civil war in this country, only thanks to Stalin's support. And now the situation is completely different, and Xi Jinping likes this situation. Otherwise, he would not have talked with Sergei Lavrov about the need to continue supporting the Russian Federation in a situation when China needs to think about what consequences Trump's ultimatum could lead to for the economy of this country, if it is really implemented already. But for authoritarian regimes, the economy is a secondary and even tertiary concept, compared to the interests of political hegemony and catastrophe in the rival camp. Moreover, authoritarian regimes have an advantage over this rival camp. Democratic leaders have to occur from the environment, which takes into account the electoral interests. They cannot allow a sharp deterioration in the lives of compatriots who will simply vote against them, or against the parties they represent or lead in the next presidential and parliamentary elections. about authoritarian leaders, such as the President of the People's Republic of China or the President of the Russian Federation. There is no reflection on how public sentiment can change in the event of a deterioration in the social level. The Chinese led the Russians. If, moreover, the deterioration of this level can be explained by the machinations of the West and the desire of Western states to weaken the geopolitical role of countries such as Russia or China. And we are seeing something similar right now. So, of course, to say that China will accept the American ultimatum and abandon the purchase of Russian oil via the supplied Trump term would be, to put it mildly, Posmotrella. I think that in the coming days, weeks and months, China will only increase its support for the Russian Federation, demonstrating its complete disrespect for the demands of Donald Trump. But this will not be done openly, because, as we have already seen, Beijing is well aware that an open conflict with the chairman of the People's Republic of China with the President of the United States does not help strengthen Beijing's position in the international arena and creates additional difficulties for the Chinese economy, which is already in a bad state. Therefore, Beijing will act constructively, perhaps even showing a reduction of the amount of Russian oil from the standpoint of legal channels of supply, but will look for opportunities for energy cooperation with Moscow. To the American mosquito could not undermine the nose. And so that Donald Trump could not make additional claims to the leadership of the People's Republic of China. Moreover, we are well aware that any tariff war between Washington and Beijing, if it begins, takes into account not only Chinese, but also American economic interests. And the recent tariff clash between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping did not at all lead to the fact that everything ended exclusively on Donald Trump's terms. Washington was forced to enter into a negotiation process with Beijing, which ended in a compromise. Nevertheless, it is clear that after things are called by their proper names, and everyone in the world understands that Russia is waging war precisely because the countries of the global south support its economy, and that China, India, and Brazil buy Russian oil. After that, pretend that China is not involved in what is happening in the Russian-Ukrainian war. It will be more and more difficult for the leadership of the PERC. Yeah, well, given today's meeting of Xi Jinping with Sergei Lavrov, in general, even this ceases to hide. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks, to the channel in Patreon, BAME, Coffee, and Donatello, which helps to develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature in YouTube itself.